Have you ever wondered if there is really an afterlife? A place where we go after our physical body passes away? Hey lunatics, it's Lady Luna, and today we're tackling a deep and timeless subject. Could there be scientific evidence of an afterlife? I would venture to say yes, and in this video we're going to be looking at the scientific and logical arguments that show this to be true. If you're new to my channel, I'm Lady Luna. I love making videos about metaphysical and mystical things, so be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. Now, I understand that immediately there will be some who claim that the study known as the weight of a soul experiment counts somewhat as proof toward the soul and an afterlife. However, even though I believe in souls and the afterlife, I need to debunk this study first before we get into more credible evidence. If you've ever heard of this experiment, it happened in 1907 when Dr. Duncan McDougall placed dying patients upon a scale, weighed them before and after they died, and determined the weight of the human soul to be 21 grams. There are a few key reasons why this experiment doesn't hold much water.
In order to track the smallest changes in weight, McDougall stared at the scale for hours and hours. Eventually, at the precise moment of a patient's death, he noticed a loss in weight that couldn't be accounted for neither by the evaporation of sweat, nor by the evacuation of the last breath from the lungs, nor even by the unfortunate emptying of the bowels, which happens from time to time. This weight loss was estimated to be 3/4 of an ounce, which translates to just above 21 grams. The experiment was reproduced on 15 dogs. McDougall assumed they had no soul. This time, no loss in weight was observed. So, the weight of the soul, scientifically proven? Wait a minute. Firstly, the experiment was carried out on 6 patients only. That's not quite enough to draw any solid conclusion. But worse, the decrease in weight was observed in only 1 of the 6 patients. 2 patients were excluded from the experiment because of technical issues. 2 others lost a little weight not only when they died, but also later on. As for the 6th patient, he did lose a little weight, but he put it on again. Yet, obviously, he hadn't come back to life. Finally, it must be said that McDougall's scale was only accurate to more or less 6 grams, which makes it quite difficult to assert that the soul weighs 21 grams precisely. Moreover, nowadays, we know that it is almost impossible to define the exact moment of death. Is it when the breathing stops? When the brain activity stops? The heart activity? At the end of the day, it is impossible to be sure that the soul weighs 21 grams. We can't tell whether it weighs anything at all.
Even though this experiment has been debunked, not to worry. There are several other scientific facts that we can observe to better understand the possibility of an afterlife. This brings us to our first example. We know that our bodies are made of energy. In fact, many would say that our bodies are comparable to a giant battery. For example, when you touch your phone screen, it responds to the energy in your fingertip. This is because our cells are specialized to conduct electrical currents. In fact, some would even claim that every cell in our body is like a battery.
What I would talk about is the role of how this mind works. First, there are signals from the environment. The brain, the function of the brain is to perceive the signals and then interpret those signals and then send the information to the cells to control the behavior and the genetics. So the function of the brain is perception, and from that creates the mind. You are made out of protein. So the energy in your body that controls the protein is a vital force. So the new science brings back the old story of vital forces controlling life.
Consider this for a moment. What happens to the energy within a battery when the battery dies, meaning the energy gets used up? Does the energy die with the battery? No. According to the first law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So that energy in the battery simply moves on in a different form.
The energy and matter in the universe does not change, it merely changes form. This is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy and matter do not get destroyed. Energy can take several different forms. The form you're probably most familiar with is heat. You feel it from the sun when you step outside in the summer. The photons of light hit your skin and the energy carried by those photons is ultimately converted to heat, which you feel on your skin. And if you stay in the sun long enough, you'll feel it in the form of burning pain. The light that you see with your eyes is triggered by those same photons that hit the back of your eyeballs, which triggers a conversion of chemical energy inside your optic nerve to electrical energy, sent to neurons in your brain. These neurons convert more chemical energy into electrical energy, which makes up your perceptions of the world around you.
One of the greatest phenomena when it comes to evidence of life after death is the concept of near-death experiences. Most doctors who have resuscitated numerous patients over the years claim to have heard the same near-death experiences of the patients over and over again. These include rising up out of their physical body, sometimes seeing a bright light and going toward it, being met with deceased friends and loved ones, and often seeing a comforting figure whom many refer to as God or Jesus. Believe it or not, there was a doctor named Sam Parnia who actually decided to do an official study on this phenomena to further study the idea of life after death.
The cases that I've discussed with you were veridical perception, where people have these experiences and they're able to be validated, suggest that they're real. Now, the thing is it important if they're real or not? Is it really important? And isn't it something, since we have so many of these veridical perceptions, is it possible that we can scientifically prove it? How far away are we from scientifically proving it? This Sam Parnia is an investigator. He's an anesthesiologist by trade. He took an interest in this. Given what's going on in the scientific community and given the number of these cases, he asked a valid question. Is it possible that when people are being resuscitated and their hearts are stopped, is it really possible that humans can perceive things? Is it possible that they could have some kind of consciousness? And so he designed a study to see if that was possible. It was called the AWARE study, because he was aware, look, as far as we know in contemporary medicine, when the heart stops, the brain ceases there's no electrochemistry in the brain within 10 to 20 seconds. It's gone. So there should be no perception. And so he designed a study to see, is there a perception? Do people come out of their bodies? And when they report seeing things, is it possible that the things they see are really are real? Now, up to this point, all of the studies looking at near-death experiences were retrospective. In other words, a person out of a city of 4 or 5 hospitals, in one hospital, one person came out of their body and described the serial number on top of the respirator. Okay, that's a big deal. Okay, so these are all retrospective. You go back and you look at the literature and you listen for the reports as they come in. Okay, he said, let's have a prospective study before people die. Let's study people who have heart attacks, people whose heart stops and we have to resuscitate them. So let's look at only people who get resuscitated, and let's see prospectively how many of these people have these cases where there is some type of vertical perception. And it was a very good study. But it's just, we learned a lot from the study. It was just published in the December issue of Resuscitation, the journal Resuscitation, December 2014 it was published. And they looked at 2,060 people who had cardiac arrest and died and needed to be resuscitated. Now, unfortunately, out of those, this study, it covered 3 countries. It looked at the United States, England, and Austria. Those are the three countries that it involved. 15 different hospitals were involved, okay? Now, unfortunately, many people, when their heart stops, they don't come back. That's a problem, okay? Only about 10% of the people survived. So when people were in the hospital and their heart stopped, in spite of resuscitation efforts, only about 10% of the people made it. And so we don't have, in other words, when you're doing a study like this, you have to look at a lot more people. So let's take a look at some of the results. Okay, out of the 2,060 patients, only 140 survived. Okay, and were well enough to have a stage 1 interview. So you ask them, did anything weird happen? What was going on? So 140 survived. Out of that 140, 39 were so weak that they were not able to answer any more questions. Okay, so that brings us down to only 101 patients. Out of those 101, 9 had classic near-death experiences. Okay, there's some type of near-death. 9% had near-death experiences. Of those 9 people, only 2 reported coming out of their body and looking around the room and seeing stuff. Okay? So remember, when people have near-death experiences, they don't always come out of their body and see their immediate surroundings. It's not unusual to come out of your body and right away you're in the tunnel. That happens too. So, the order is not always the same. People skip steps all the time, okay? So, 2 people came out and actually saw their physical environment. Now, of those 2 people, one guy was not well enough for the second interview, okay? He was still very weak. And so only one came out and saw the environment and was able to accurately describe things. Now, what did he describe? When he was being resuscitated and his heart stopped, he heard the AED device, he heard the defibrillator say, shock the patient, he heard that. But then, into his resuscitation, when he was out of it, when his heart was stopped, he accurately described one of the people that cared for him, one of the doctors that came in was in blue hospital gown, and he was bald, and he was rather overweight. And he described the person. And he's also described what he did during the resuscitation. The next day, as people were coming in his room, and they asked him, can you tell me who was it that assisted in the resuscitation yesterday? He picked the guy out. It's veridical perception. But what's unique about this particular case is this was part of a prospective study. Okay, and so now we not only have retrospective cases, now we have a valid. This was a valid prospective study, which has seen the same thing. Okay. Now, what if we want to get a lot of these cases? What if we want to just go on CNN and report we've got tons of these cases to say instead of just this one? Well, what we learned from the AWARE study is that if we're serious about getting scientific evidence, we would have to study not several thousand people, but tens of thousands of people. Or if you were only studying several thousand people, then instead of following for only 4 years, because this was a 4-year study, we would have to follow them for decades. And then we would have enough cases to go more public on these.
Interesting findings indeed. Consciousness is a strange thing. The concept of consciousness can't even be fully understood or defined scientifically. After all, while consciousness exists in the brain, it is very much non-physical. As we know, it's seemingly impossible to physically prove a non-physical thing. But we can at least use logic and reasoning to observe what consciousness is and where it may come from.
If you search online for hard problem, you won't find an unsolved math equation or a cosmological issue. The top hits will be none other than the hard problem of consciousness, because there really isn't a greater problem out there. How is it that a world of lifeless matter creates conscious beings that are self-aware and can introspect about their own existence? In other words, the hard problem is simply trying to explain how matter could become or create consciousness. But perhaps it is only a problem because we assume we have to get consciousness from matter. In 2005, the 125th anniversary issue of Science Journal ranked this as one of the biggest questions left unsolved. The fact remains, there is no explanation of how the mind or consciousness could arise from physical properties, and there is a large amount of data that suggests consciousness is not a creation of brain processes. It was decades ago that neuroscientist Wilder Penfield began to discover hints of this. Applying an electrode to parts of the brain, he could force patients to do several things. He could cause arms to move involuntarily, vocalize involuntarily, as well as recall memories. But there was an important exception. In his studies, he could not force patients to act involuntarily. In other words, he could not stimulate the will. There is no place in the cerebral cortex where electrical stimulation will cause a patient to believe or to decide. I am forced to conclude that there is no valid evidence that either epileptic discharge or electrical stimulation can activate the mind. No proof for a physical basis of consciousness has been shown to exist. The main problem is correlations between the brain and the conscious mind are expected to exist, even if consciousness doesn't reduce the brain activity or functions. On substance dualism or idealism, we would expect correlations in the brain with consciousness. So correlations alone do not show the brain creates consciousness. That is confusing correlation with causation. Correlations are what needs to be explained. They alone are not evidence the mind is emergent. In fact, researchers have pointed out even if the brain creates consciousness, our current methods and technology are incapable of discovering it. So when some physicalists assert the discovery of correlations in the brain is evidence the brain creates consciousness, they are not being accurate with regards to the implications and limitations of these discoveries.
So, with all of this evidence in mind, we can conclude the following. Number 1. Consciousness does not originate in the brain, but is indeed its own energy. Number 2. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Therefore, we know that after death, our consciousness energy does not die with our physical body, but moves on in a different form. And number 3. From the study of Sam Parnia on near-death experiences, we see that many patients give extremely similar accounts after dying and being resuscitated. Some were also able to describe objects in the room that were intentionally placed out of the sight of a patient lying down, and were only visible from a higher point in the room. This is extremely valid and interesting evidence toward there being life after physical death. Thank you for watching, everyone. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a future video. Also, if you made it this far, be sure to comment the secret word of the day, which is angel. Stay safe and well, guys. Bye!